moment I stepped into the antique store, a chill ran down my spine. The air was heavy with the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic. It felt like the store itself was holding its breath. The walls were lined with shelves brimming with forgotten treasures, tarnished silverware, faded photographs, and peculiar trinkets whose histories felt as heavy as the dust that blanketed them. Evelyn had begged me not to buy anything, warning me about my penchant for impulsive decisions. But she wasn't here. I had come alone, as I often did when chasing a story. I was a freelance journalist, constantly scouring for unique angles to pitch. Stories about forgotten places or objects always seemed to resonate with readers, and this store seemed ripe with possibility. My eyes were drawn to a glass cabinet near the back, where an array of jewelry glittered faintly under a dim overhead bulb. That's when I saw it. A delicate gold locket, oval-shaped and engraved with intricate runes that seemed to shimmer in the low light. Something about it called to me, as though it were alive and eager to be held. "That one's a bit unusual," the shopkeeper said, startling me. He was an elderly man with thin glasses perched precariously on his nose. His gaze was wary, almost as if he didn't want to sell it. "What do the runes mean?" I asked, picking up the locket. It felt oddly warm against my palm. "No one's ever been able to decipher them," he replied. "It's been here longer than I've owned the shop. Some say it's cursed." I chuckled, dismissing his words as a sales tactic. A cursed locket? It was too good to pass up. My journalist instincts flared to life, envisioning the article I could write. I paid for it without hesitation, and left the shop with the locket tucked safely into my pocket. Back at home, Evelyn was waiting for me, arms crossed and an exasperated look on her face. "What did you buy this time?" she demanded. Her tone was teasing but laced with genuine concern. "Just a little something for a new story," I said, pulling out the locket. Evelyn's expression shifted the moment she saw it. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against the engraved surface. "It's beautiful," she admitted, "but it feels strange, almost like it's buzzing." I laughed. "You're imagining things." That night, I placed the locket on my bedside table and drifted off to sleep. I don't know how long I had been asleep when the whispers began, soft, almost melodic, but in a language I couldn't understand. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. The locket was no longer on the table. Instead, it was lying on the pillow beside me, its runes faintly glowing in the darkness. I told myself I must have moved it in my sleep, but over the next few days, the incidents became harder to dismiss. I would find the locket in different rooms, always in places I was certain I hadn't left it. The whispers grew louder, and at times, I felt as though someone was standing just behind me, their breath cold against my neck. Evelyn noticed my growing unease and tried to comfort me, but she couldn't hide her own apprehension. The turning point came one night when she was awoken by my scream. She found me in the living room, standing in a trance-like state in front of the fireplace. The locket was clutched tightly in my hand, its metal glowing red-hot. Evelyn shouted my name, shaking me until I snapped out of it. Pain shot through my palm, and I dropped the locket, which hit the floor with a dull thud. When I looked at my hand, a strange symbol had been burned into my skin, a perfect replica of the runes on the locket. "We have to get rid of it," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. She took it upon herself to research the locket's origins while I struggled with sleepless nights and an ever-present sense of dread. Her findings were chilling. The locket had belonged to a widow in the 19th century, a woman named Margaret Halloway. Betrayed by her lover, she had cursed the locket so that anyone who wore it would share her torment. The whispers, Evelyn learned, were said to be the widow's unending lament. "We need to destroy it," Evelyn declared. I wasn't in any state to argue. That night, we took the locket to the backyard, where Evelyn had set up a small forge. As the flames consumed it, the whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of anguish and rage. The locket melted into a pool of molten gold, and for a moment, there was silence. We thought it was over, but as the metal cooled, it hardened into a new shape, a small, delicate ring. I reached for it instinctively, but Evelyn snatched it away. "Don't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes were wide with terror. "What is it?" I asked. She held up the ring, and my blood ran cold. The runes were still there, etched into the band. And then we both heard it, a soft, unmistakable whisper. But this time, it was saying Evelyn's name. Her grip on the ring tightened, her knuckles white. "We can't keep this," she said, her voice shaking. But as she tried to move, her feet seemed rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around her like a suffocating fog. I shouted her name, desperate to break the spell, but her eyes were distant, fixed on the ring. The runes glowed brighter, casting eerie shadows across her face. Finally, with a scream of defiance, Evelyn hurled the ring into the forge. The flames roared to life, higher and hotter than before, and the whispers turned into an agonized wail that pierced the night. When it was over, nothing remained but ash. We stood there, trembling, the silence around us almost unbearable. I wanted to believe it was truly over, but deep down I knew better. Curses don't simply vanish. They evolve. Weeks later, Evelyn began complaining of strange dreams. Dreams where a woman in black whispered secrets in her ear. And every so often, I would catch her staring off into the distance, her fingers tracing an invisible circle on her palm. We destroyed the locket in the ring. But whatever haunted them had found a way to linger. Now, as I write this, I can't ignore the faint whispers that have returned. They're louder than before, and this time, they're saying my name. The curse isn't over. It never was. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Mark and I have been looking for a project for months, something to get us out of the dreary confines of our cramped apartment and into a home of our own. When we stumbled upon the Victorian mansion in New Orleans, we both knew it was the one. It was in ruins, sure, but there was something about the old building that drew us in. Its once grand facade was now weathered and forgotten, but its bones were solid, waiting to be restored. We were naive then, blissfully unaware that the mansion had its own plans for us. The house had been abandoned for decades, the last owner vanishing mysteriously years before we arrived. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked underfoot as we began the long and arduous process of renovation. Mark was a practical one, always thinking about how to bring life back to the place, what colors to use, how to restore the moldings. I was the dreamer, caught up in the house's tragic beauty. But neither of us could have imagined the horrors that awaited. One morning, while we were tearing down an old, rotting wall to make space for a new window, I felt something odd. The wall was a mess of plaster and ancient wood, but my hand brushed against something smooth, almost like a stone. Mark, too, noticed my pause. He muttered something about finding another dead rat behind the wall, but stopped when I pulled out what looked like an ornate box. The box was beautiful. Intricate carvings of vines and roses wound around the wood. The gilded edges faded with age. There was a strange energy about it, something unsettling, like it had been waiting for us. It wasn't just the box that was odd, though. As I lifted the lid, I saw what was inside, a necklace. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, an emerald pendant, large and vivid green, nestled in a bed of black velvet. The stone was so perfect. It almost looked artificial, but it radiated warmth, a heat that seemed to pulse with life. I couldn't resist. I held it in my hands for only a moment before I draped it over my neck. Instantly, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. The air turned thick, as though a presence had entered. I shivered, but Mark just smiled, commenting on how nice it looked on me. His words seemed far away, though muffled, as if I was hearing them from underwater. That night, I was restless. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of a woman. Her face twisted in pain, her hands bound to a chair, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes locked onto mine, pleading for something, and then the image would fade, only to return stronger, more vivid. In the darkness of the room, I could almost hear her whispering, calling my name. It wasn't until the morning that I realized it wasn't just a nightmare. When I awoke, I felt exhausted, drained as though I hadn't slept at all. The emerald necklace still hung around my neck, but the weight of it felt different, heavier somehow, as though the stone was alive, watching me. I mentioned my dream to Mark, but he brushed it off, calling it the result of too much stress from the renovation. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Later that day, as we worked our way through the dusty, forgotten corners of the house, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman in my dream. Her desperate face, the way she seemed to reach out to me, had stayed with me all day, and I found myself drawn to the basement, the one place we hadn't yet explored. Mark was busy in the kitchen, so I decided to go alone, convinced that somehow the answer lay in that dark, musty room. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the basement, and the air grew cooler the deeper I went. The basement smelled of mildew and rot, but it also carried a faint scent of something else, a faint perfume, almost like roses. It was so strong, it made my throat tighten. I stepped further in, the shadows swallowed me whole, and then I saw her. The woman from my dreams was standing in the center of the room, her back arched unnaturally, her eyes wide with terror. Her neck was bruised, a dark purple hue encircling it like a garrote, and there was, around her neck, exactly where the bruises were, was the emerald necklace. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. The woman's eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, I could hear her voice, faint but clear. "Help me break the curse," she whispered, her voice raspy, almost like the wind through dry leaves. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, but I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, scrambling up the stairs, my heart racing in my chest. Mark was in the kitchen when I burst through the door, pale and shaking, but before I could explain what had happened, I felt the chill, the cold presence that had haunted me all night. The house itself seemed to shudder, as though it was alive, its walls groaning under an unseen weight. That night, the dreams returned, more intense than before. The woman was no longer silent. Now she screamed, pleading with me to help her. I could feel the necklace pressing against my skin, the warmth turning to ice, suffocating me, as though it were trying to drag me into the same fate that had befallen her. The curse had already begun to take hold. The haunting intensified, and I found myself drawn to the necklace, unable to take it off, almost as if my very life depended on it. I would sit for hours, staring at the emerald, mesmerized by its gleaming surface. Mark tried to intervene, but it was too late. He couldn't break my fixation, and I could sense his fear growing, his helplessness building. One night, in a moment of sheer madness, I almost strangled myself with a chain, the weight of the stone pulling me deeper into the curse's grip. My vision blurred, and I felt as if I was slipping away, just like the woman in the basement had. But then Mark found me, yanked the necklace from my neck, and shattered it with a hammer. I collapsed, gasping for breath, as though waking from a nightmare. But the nightmare was far from over. The following night, as we tried to make sense of everything, the mansion itself seemed to revolt. A fire broke out, seemingly out of nowhere, consuming the entire structure in a fiery inferno. The smoke filled the air, thick and choking, but we could do nothing. We watched in horror as the mansion burned, crumbling to ash. When the fire was finally out, all that remained were charred remnants of the walls and furniture and the emerald. The necklace, though, was untouched, gleaming defiantly in the ash. I can still hear her voice sometimes. The woman, her curse, her cry for justice. The emerald calls to me, even now, though I know better than to touch it again. And I know now that some things are better left buried, even if they've been waiting for centuries to be uncovered. The mansion is gone, but the curse remains, forever.